walks in to the Museum of Baseball Cards. What follows is a story. It begins, predictably so, at the beginning. Attempting to track down the first ever baseball card is an inexact and debatable task. Diving deep into every candidate with a decent claim would be perfectionist overkill that would only slightly contribute to the full story. Put on a snorkel. It's gonna get subjective and come down to the question of what really makes a baseball card a baseball card. Really, try to answer that yourself. Take a second. Now, here is our timeline. They are all really far away from each other, and which one came first isn't the issue. When did they become baseball cards is the issue. Let's start simple. Here is a definition. A baseball card is a baseball picture on a small piece of paper, or whatever, cardboard, foil, plastic, anything. Well, if you go by that bare-bones definition, you can get your Age of Enlightenment self back to 1744. The first ever recorded mention of a sport called baseball, which would have had vastly different rules at the time, was in a book originally published in 1744. And, well, baseball picture? Yeah, small piece of paper. Okay. I mean, there's even text. It's labeled. It's a nameplate. It describes a boy hitting a ball, then running, heading towards the next defined post, like agreed upon marker, so the next base, and then home. The meat and potatoes were all there. I think most would agree that this single-page slip, which makes up less than 1% of John Newberry's 1774 A Little Pretty Pocketbook, does not qualify as a baseball card. We're gonna need to set some more parameters. Now, maybe you think there's got to be a single player on it, or it has to be a player or a team name. Maybe it has to have color, some sort of design, or maybe it has to be part of a set. Let's keep going. Exactly 1 century later, there is the famous Magnolia Invitation, one of not many existing visual markers of baseball's amateur era. It's a ticket to a game that took place in February of 1844, and it's thought that the piece of cardstock was meant to be taken home and kept after as memorabilia. A card intended to be kept and to be collected. We're getting warmer. Sometime around 1860 to 1865, something happened. I say that with confidence. You could say the first baseball card ever was made. You could also say, hey, the Civil War is going on, because the Civil War was going on. It's a crossover episode in the timeline that I didn't think I'd ever be back far enough to touch on. But keep in mind the times. Keep in mind how old the things we're talking about are. Older than Major League Baseball. Keep in mind that slavery was still legal. And for these reasons, the obvious chaos that the Civil War brought in America, we have trouble dating our next candidate precisely. I usually see circa 1860 attached to this team photo of the Brooklyn Atlantics. And here's another point of, is it a card contention? A team photo. Does it have to focus on just one player, or can a whole team picture count? Now, one thing that this visiting card of the Brooklyn Atlantics has going for it that separates it from most candidates of the time is a back. The back of the card has what seems to be a newspaper clipping from the time cut out and pasted onto it. It's a very trading card-like size, and it includes not just the enthralling headline of baseball, cricket, etc., but also the team name and a list of players from the Atlantics team. You could read and see who was on your card. This piece of cardstock paper has a solid argument going for it. One of those names on the back is Pierce, which is likely in reference to Dickie Pierce, who's thought to have possibly been the first professional baseball player, ever, the first person that received money to play, though that's unverifiable. Dickey also revolutionized the position of shortstop, helping turn it into the roaming around the diamond constant cutoff man for the outfield. He also one time got this cool new idea for a new way to hit the ball. He called it a tricky hit. It sounds like a Mario Super Slugger's power-up, but Dickey's tricky was a lot more underwhelming. It was a bunt. He invented the bunt in baseball and gave it a way too cool name, so they toned it down. For a quick idea on what baseball was like when the spectators could have slaves, by the way, here's this. On August 20th, 1860, the Brooklyn Atlantics beat the Mutual Club of New York 26-14. Every single player on both teams, all 18 guys, scored at least one run. Brooklyn was catapulted to victory by 5 runs in the 8th and 9th innings. Baseball wasn't unrecognizable, but why are we talking about this? It was 160 years ago. Back to the cards, stay on topic. It is a very strong candidate, with attributes nothing before it ever had for the first ever baseball card. I think 1865 carries another great example of our conundrum. A U.S. Supreme Court justice, when attempting to describe hardcore pornography, once said, "I can't define it, but I know it when I see it." I use that same logic when I attempt to discuss James White Davis. This is it. This is all I'm talking about. In November 1865, months after the end of the Civil War, a picture hit the papers. It was of a man named James Davis in his baseball uniform, just how he belongs. It had labeled his name and what team he played for. It was cut out of the newspaper and collected as a small little card. What more can you ask for in a baseball card? I've never seen anyone discuss this picture as the potential first, but I think it's worth bringing up if for no other reason than to stress the subjectivity of what's what, and to bring up a quote about hardcore pornography. I try to work those in when I can. Now, the card and the guy. They shorten his name to Jas, which about 25 seconds after reading that, I learned for the first time that the name James used to be shortened to Jas in text all the time. It was a very common thing. That's gross. But James White Davis played an important part in early baseball. He was an administrator, loose definition, for some of the baseball leagues leading up to the formation of the NL. Now, should we get off topic and dive way too deep into James? No, but we're going to. He loved baseball more than life. One day, the Knickerbockers celebrated their 10th anniversary with a party. They had a big banner made for the occasion. James showed up, had a jolly time. He took the banner home after the party. It sat in his bedroom until his death. Before that death, he had actually written a will, requested how he wanted to be buried, in a letter that somehow, amazingly, survived time to today. He asked that he be wrapped in that Knickerbocker flag for eternity and buried with a tombstone shaped like a home plate. Like a substandard genie, the universe granted just one of those 2 wishes. 117 years after his death, the Society for American Baseball Research found his request letter and was able to track down his resting place. It was completely unmarked. 6 feet under the lack of an indicator, his body lied, wrapped in an old, deteriorating banner that advertised the Knickerbocker Baseball Club. A tombstone, shaped like a home plate, was installed to mark the grave, 117 years after James went into it. The exact word-for-word inscription that James had requested was put on the plate. Better late than never. In 1866, things really pick up, and will not slow down for a while. There's another random photo of a whole field that we can at least date to spring of that year, no more accurate. This is an image of Elizian Field in New Jersey, a very popular park for the time, where the first ever game of modern baseball is thought to have been played. Now, I don't believe this to be the first card because its case is similar to the Magnolia Invitation from a few years ago. In fact, that one is known as the Magnolia Invitation because that was the name of one of the teams in the game, but that game also took place right here at Elizian Field. They were both just normal postcards handed out to some fans in the stands and meant to be kept as a memento. So I think they're really similar, and If you think one is, you think the other is, so the Magnolia Invitation beats it. But I wanted to at least include this one because I see its name pop up in reference to the question of the first baseball card a lot. It's actually a drawing of a game that never happened at Elizian Field for a championship game that was supposed to be played years ago in 1860, but never was. Then it was made and handed out at games that took place 6 years later in 1866. On the mound is thought to be pitcher Jim Creighton Jr., the sport's greatest player ever up to that point. Now, Major League Baseball themselves, in present day, consider a different 1866 print to be the first card ever. That year's Lansingburg Unions. Obviously, as I placed them in the special big glass box, I agree. Now, the team had individual professional photos taken of their players and put on small prints, almost like a company ID photo. These, however, did not have names of the players or teams on them. But the big thing, there were thought to have been multiple duplicates of each one printed, so thus a full collectible set you could try and get. That is what people go crazy for. Humans love collecting by nature. It is as integral as any intentional act. Early man created the idea of a home as a consistent place to sleep and store one's collection of things that they gathered through life. The concept of getting all of one thing and putting them all in the same place, it works in our heads. And collecting when there is a certain amount of things to collect, and once you get them all, you win, like so many parts of your brain fire for that. That factor, collectability, is yet another extremely important one that many consider necessary to call something a baseball card. Now, copies of these ones were likely given to players so they could hand them out to family and friends. They may have been handed out at games to fans in the bleachers, but today, for the Lansingburg Unions, only 6 of the cards have survived. Most people think there were 9, maybe 10 total in the set, just enough for a full lineup. Thus, you could argue that the first ever set of baseball cards is incomplete. Collectors must not be very good at this game. And one more go-around for the year was another pro team. Named after Native American Chief Wapella, the Rock Island Wapellas had very similar photos taken of their whole team this year. These ones full body as opposed to headshots. Still no player names, team names, or any sort of position stats or biography. 3 guys did decide to do a youth sports style buddy photo, which is awesome. They were distributed in the same manner, given to friends and family of those involved with the team, and fans who wanted one. This was the team's first year of existence. They allowed 7 runs in their first game ever as a team. They won that game by 111 runs, and they weren't extraordinarily popular, meaning they likely made these cards as a sort of novelty gag gift for the players and their friends. Now, their full 13-card collection is available in its entirety, arguably the first complete set ever, and it's projected to sell for around $150,000 coming up soon if you're interested. And so, Major League Baseball says that the Lansingburg Union cards were made before the Rock Island Wapellas, and I personally can't find anything to verify that. I don't know why they say it with so much confidence, but it's the only thing we have to go on, so I'm kinda just trusting it and choosing Lansingburg as the first. You can take it with a grain of salt. The baseball world continues like this for a couple decades. Pictures of the sport in general, or whole teams, or individual players were often printed out in various formats. You could argue forever about which of them is and is not a card, but I think we've hit on most of the main defining factors. I should at least throw the name Andrew Peck into the arena. He, along with a much more wealthy friend, created the Peck and Snyder Sporting Goods Company. I see Peck and Snyder mentioned a lot for the first card, probably more than anyone else, but they didn't start until a couple years after everything we just went through. So I don't think it's them. Regardless, they were pioneers of the baseball card industry, and they started giving these things out to any and everyone. On one side, their cards would advertise a certain team, with each player labeled by name, but on the back, they would advertise the Peck and Snyder sporting goods company, trying to simultaneously boost their own popularity while boosting the sport of baseballs, because a store that focused on baseball, they could only get as big as the sport got. We all just sort of accept that it was a mess before this. Very confusing to know anything for sure, but there's one change that was made. One thing that started happening that everyone agrees started a new era. Really, the first recognized era of the hobby. Not just when baseball cards were invented, which one the first was, but when it became a hobby. A pastime you do for fun and enjoy. Let's jump a little further. 1886. There is a clear picture of a player in a uniform. His team name is on his chest, clear to see. His name is written out, Adrian C. Anson. No one knows him by Adrian. The C is short for Cap, and that's the name baseball remembers him for. But, well, down here is what's interesting. What's that advertising? Cigarettes. Cigarettes. Goodwin and Company were manufacturers of tobacco. They were a successful company, one of the big smoke players in the nation for sure. They outdated the Civil War, which was becoming a bit of an accomplishment. A couple successful cigarette brands highlighted the name, Gypsy Queen, Dog's Head, and Old Judge. It was that last one that broke the barrier. Not uncommon for the time was for packs of cigarettes to include a trading card. Not a baseball card, but a trading card. These cards could have anything, anyone on them. Famous people, I've seen a lot with different Native American chiefs. There was ones with animals, military figures. Some advertise cocaine. It's a good remedy for toothaches, try it. And even newspaper writers. These guys had their own whole collection you could search for. Now, these cards were included with cigarettes to stiffen up the packaging and prevent your stogies from rubbing off on each other or getting damaged in any way. You can probably imagine the feeling, it's not too hard. A lot of the time, most of the time, you probably just throw the card away. But if it's someone you recognize, someone you like, maybe you'll hold on to it. Another reason for the cards beyond helping packaging was that it could help build a bit of brand loyalty. The common story is that parents would give these cards to their kids after they bought their smokes, and so kids would encourage their parents to buy whichever brand had the cards that they liked most. No one ever said that cigarette companies weren't genius when it came to advertising to kids. Athletes weren't widely considered popular enough to get one of these spots. The idea just hadn't been there. It would be like telling someone today to put an accountant on a trading card. Why would you do it? No one cares. Or, a newspaper writer. But Old Judge, who made a lot of these older trading cards, changed that in 1886. The N167 set is the big one. We'll get into that name, the numbers and letters, and exactly what they mean a little later. But this set of cards was huge. The total value isn't actually known. We don't have the full thing today. Its focus is highlighted mainly on famous actresses from the time. Posed in a variety of ways, these women were the stars of the set. But also thrown in there, with a very small amount included, were baseball players and even a couple famous boxers. This is the first ever set of cigarette baseball cards. If you wanted to really wait until things got official, if cigarettes are your starting gun, then you could say that the first ever sports card is a tie between baseball players and boxers. The N167, Old Judge sporting side of things, has just 16 known cards today. 12 baseball players and 4 boxers. All 12 of the ball players were members of the 1886 New York Giants. Again, we don't know how many there were total, but likely many more than this. Over 20 of the famous actress cards still exist today, which is insane considering they don't have the value of these super old baseball cards. No one is out searching for the actresses nowadays. The fact that we still have more of them tells us there were way more actress cards than baseball players. Unsurprisingly, of the 12 ball players we do have, half of them are in the Hall of Fame. This makes sense not just because that's what people would go search for, but also because that's what people would be more likely to hold on to at the time and for the next century. A good player when most of these cards were just quickly thrown away. Even a non-collector had at least a better chance, still very low, of holding on to a great baseball player he recognized, Buck Ewing. But like 95% of these cards would have just been tossed minutes after being opened. They couldn't have known how much they were throwing away. How could they have? It's such a small, random, inanimate object. It's weird to think about. Buck Ewing, that's the best catcher of all time. He could hit and play backstop with the best of them. Roger Connor was a tower of power. He hit 131 home runs despite never seeing a field in the 1900s. Tim Keefe had 300 wins, so did Mikey Welch. This is funny, I suppose. They spelt Mikey's name wrong. Welch instead of Welsh. They messed up Roger Connor's too, actually. An error on a baseball card. How kooky. Probably meaningless. How about the boxers? One just says McAuliffe. His first name was Jack. He lived in a box. Well, a house, but similar shape. He was nicknamed the Napoleon of the Ring, not a bad one for the tiny Irishman who fought at lightweight. Jim Carney was an odd thing to put on his boxing card, considering his real name was Jem. Jem, yeah. And the insulting thing is, I know they knew how to spell Jem because, well, Jem Smith, the last boxer that we know of who has two different cards of himself. He won the heavyweight title in '86. The next year he fought to defend that title in a bout against Jake Kilring. After 106 rounds, 2.5 hours of fighting, the match was called due to darkness. Boxing was pretty cool. He was popular enough to get at least 2 cards of the 4 we have today. Unfortunately, I can't find any images of the second one, but if located altogether, the Jack Jim Jem collection is one of the best of all time. Actually, you'll never believe this last second addition of information. Jack McAuliffe used to go by Jem as well. It was his nickname. One could stretch and call this the Quad Gem set. And I hear you guys. I'll listen to you. Here is an illustration of Jem fighting Jim, who was, of course, actually Jem. So there you are, living, existing, in the year 1886. Times are good. You walk on into the store, buy a pack of cigarettes. You open them up to see who came with. Old Judge, Goodwin, and Co. They'd changed the game. It would never be the same again. And who's to judge when the good old cigarettes start to win? Everyone was named James. In a world full of Jameses, where do you go? What do you do? Look at this one. His middle name is Buchanan. His last name is Duke, like the school, but he's not blue or a school. He's white and a man. His father owned a company. Guess what they made? Cigarettes. It was cigarettes. Very obviously, it was cigarettes. It was called W. Duke and Sons. Dad's name was Washington, also known as Not James. They wanted to be the best at selling cigarettes. I guess we'll have to wait and see how they do at that. There's also this other guy. What do you think his name is? James Albert Bonsack must have been a tough name to have on the elementary school playground. Luckily, he was past that now. He was a college student. Okay. No one cares. Let's drop that. There's this other huge tobacco company called Allen and Ginter. Now, cigarettes weren't traditionally super popular in America. Cigars were heavily preferred, but by the 1880s, the market was just starting to grow for cigarettes, actually a little quicker than companies were expecting or could keep up with. Allen and Ginter, like the rest of the industry, was looking for evolution. The company decided to start a contest. The rules were simple. Hey, if anyone out there can make a cigarette rolling machine, an automatic one that rolls the cigarettes for us, we will give a $75,000 prize. That's over $2 million in today money. James Albert Bonsack, the college student, oh, he did matter. He instantly dropped out of school and devoted his life to this mission. In time, it only took him a couple years, he invented the cigarette rolling machine. He brought it to Allen and Ginter excitedly. Based on the evidence, we can infer that he skipped along to company headquarters in a jolly mood while whistling out loud. Allen and Ginter saw James, saw his machine, and said, "Nah, we're good." Preferring not to pay out that huge prize money they had promised, they pulled out the fine print. Technically, the contest was for an automatic cigarette rolling machine that Allen and Ginter purchased. So they just decided to not purchase it from poor James. Oh. Okay. And there he was, James Albert Bonsack, with the world's only cigarette rolling machine. No company, no customers, and no college education. Once the Buchanan Duke version of James heard about all this, if you remember him, yeah, he was excited. He instantly stepped in and partnered with James number 2. He began using the machine, abusing the machine, sending his company, Duke & Sons Tobacco, flying. See, the rest of the big tobacco companies willingly were choosing not to use this brand new rolling machine. They had all kind of developed a preference for the old-fashioned way of hand rolling because they thought the cigarettes looked better when rolled by hand, and there was no possibility for mistakes. These were both true. Out of the James machine, they looked a little factory-made, and it wasn't near perfect. Some boxes would have a bad cigarette, maybe even 2. That's a turnoff to customers. This is part of the reason, along with wanting to keep their prize money, that Allen and Ginter declined to purchase the machine from James Albert Bonsack originally when he tried giving it to him. And every other company of the time except W. Duke & Sons similarly declined the offer. Okay. This gave the Dukenheimer the advantage. None of the machine's negative qualities mattered at all. James Buchanan Duke bet the house on that machine. He won the bet. The best human rollers could make about 4 cigarettes every minute, if they were lucky, not including mistakes. This thing could roll about 200 cigarettes a minute. The difference there looks like this. Oh, wait, sorry. That's half of it. Obviously, it cut the hell out of his production costs. It made cigarettes so much faster, so he had to pay so many less people to do it. Then, he was able to slash the prices his cigarettes sold for, undercutting his competition to levels they were unable to compete with. Within 4 years of implementing the machine, every employed hand roller of the Duke & Sons Tobacco Company had been fired. James Albert Bonsack's invention very quickly killed an industry. And you're worried about AI taking your job. This happened in the mid-80s, 1880s, of course. James spent the next few years watching the Duke & Sons Company become the cigarette king of America. They were kings when Goodwin & Co. released the N167 set, the first baseball and boxer cigarette cards ever, in 1886. They were kings as a few more sports cards started to be released the next few years by multiple different companies advertising their tobacco on either side. Allen and Ginter, the ones who ignored the rolling machine and now exist at Duke & Sons' mercy because of it, well, they released a set in 1887 that will become one of the more famous of all time, known as the N28 World's Champions set, featuring many great players of the era. It's a huge collection with boxers, wrestlers, other types of fighters, there's rifle shooters, and a lot of baseball players, even a lot we still have today. By now they were starting to become the main focus of the pack. People liked the baseball cards more than most of them. People were starting to like baseball in general a lot in this country. A very small amount of people were even collecting the cards, putting sets together, causing baseball cards to slowly, over multiple years, earn the spotlight of trading cards in cigarettes. The same year, a similar but even bigger set was released by Old Judge Cigarettes, this one the N172 set. There is a ton of these that still exist today, thousands of varieties of cards. If you were to put a ratio of age to size on every baseball card set ever made, these would probably be number 1 and 2 all time. W. Duke & Sons, while dominating the cigarette industry, did release some cards in these years, though all of them were just celebrity cards, nothing with baseball players that I can find. The closest thing is they had some pictures that were like situations of the sport. Weird. By 1890, most accounts estimate that James Buchanan Duke and his dad's old company that he was running was responsible for somewhere between 40 and 50% of all cigarettes in America. Do you know what James calls 40 to 50%? Barely half empty. He went around putting in work, whispering words into ears. Soon, I'll be damned, the 5 biggest tobacco companies in America were merging. One of them is Goodwin & Co., which includes their brand Old Judge, the makers of the first ever cigarette pack. Another one, Allen & Ginter, who had been active in the card game too. You should have taken the machine, now you're gobbled up. And of course, leading the merger talks, setting himself up in position to rule this new super company, was James Buchanan Duke. Oh yeah, here's a picture of him. He was appointed president of the now named American Tobacco Company. It's broad. Fittingly so. It's estimated that after this 5-way merger, the American Tobacco Company controlled over 90% of all cigarettes in America. There is a board game that describes that perfectly. Chutes and Ladders. Now, if you owned 90% of all the Chutes and Ladders games, it wouldn't be fair. You could run the price up and down, buy out your competitors, and completely dominate the market. In business terms, that's a monopoly. That was currently the American Tobacco Company. James Buchanan Duke owned the market. He did so for a while. Over the years, the ATC bought out dozens of competitors. Every year, they would gobble up anyone making a little too much money. On the way, as we went into the new century, there were baseball cards being made. In 1903, Bryce Williams, a company that made caramel treats, put a big collectible set out with their orders, taking cards out of cigarettes and making them more child-friendly. This set was strictly baseball cards, no other weird ones. They're starting to become the life of the trading card party. I especially like the backs of these cards, which are sometimes blank, but sometimes just contain black text that plainly states one of 150 prominent baseball players. The 1906 Fan Craze game cards look very similar to some way later cards. Uniquely, you could go buy this set in its entirety at Sears for 48 cents. That's about $15 today. It's also a very early example of just buying cards on their own, not accompanied by a treat or a cigarette or anything else. That didn't stick, not yet, and it wouldn't become common in the industry for like 7 or 8 more decades. They were ahead of the curve. Now you may notice, these aren't tobacco companies making these cards. Aren't cigarettes supposed to rule the world? Well, at the very end of the century, the Dingley Act was passed. This was just a new thing about raising tariffs in the United States to protect American industries from foreign competition, but buried deep in it, an afterthought to most, was a new little rule that made it illegal to include cards in cigarette packs. It had been realized that a lot of kids were finding ways to buy cigarettes because they wanted the cards. But then, once they got them, they were kids with cigarettes, and the kids would generally find out how great cigarettes are. Oopsie, we made the children smoke. So, thus, for a weird, kind of random 10-year period, baseball cards of any kind were banned from cigarette packs, right after cigarettes had pretty much started and dominated the industry. Still, as with the non-cigarette packs we just touched on, the hobby was able to, at least a little bit, grow around this restriction. I should still make it clear, it was not popular. They were random to people, baseball cards were. You can probably imagine it yourself. How do you treat most random business card-sized papers you acquire today? You throw them away instantly. Yeah, maybe if you happen to know the person on it or you're really interested in it, you would maybe keep the card, throw it in your nightstand or junk drawer, and lose it to eternity. Even maybe-er than that, you could collect them, try to get a few more, complete the entire set even, but is it worth it? Not many thought so. Not many even spent this much time thinking about it. It was a small-time hobby, kept up by guys perceived as nerdy and kids that the country accidentally got addicted to smoking. Then, the Dingley Act was lifted. In 1909, it got pushed out for a new act on tariffs, and lost in the sauce, not making the jump, who knows why, the rule banning trading cards in cigarette packs disappeared. The market opened back up, and after a short break, cigarettes once again ruled the world.
This golden chalice is of immeasurable historical and religious significance. The Holy Grail.
In 1909, yeah, it was as soon as they were allowed to again, it was the American Tobacco Company, James Buchanan Duke and the boys, that decided to release a set, nay, a conglomeration of baseball cards. This was no ordinary collection. There are 524 cards in the full set, which is designated as the T206 set of cards. But it gets deeper. On the back of every card is an advertisement for a brand of cigarettes. But since this is the American Tobacco Company we're talking about, there are 16 different brands that they owned. They're all advertised on different cards. 15 are cigarette brands, one is a chewing tobacco. And that one chew, it was the Polar Bear brand. It's weird because the card was just kind of thrown into your tin of loose tobacco rather than being stuffed in a pack of cigarettes, which made all the Polar Bear cards noticeably way darker and dirtier because they were rubbing off on loose tobacco the whole time they were packaged. These varied backs make it so technically the number of unique cards in the set is virtually endless. And even that 524 number could be debated to be 525. There's a few weird Ty Cobb cards that advertise a cigarette brand named after him, rather than any of the American Tobacco Company brands. But his cards are the only one where this back can be found, so there's debate as to whether or not they are truly a part of the set. Amazingly, all 524, or 5, of the cards in this set are known to exist. They're all confirmed. The world has completed the set. From what I can tell, though, I've never seen a single collector who's ever got them all together at once. I don't think they've ever been in the same room. But these cards are not all made the same. There exists hierarchy. Everyone else is down here. 4 of them are up here. Actually, 3. The last one is up top. Now, these are called the Big Four when discussing T206 cards. If you wanted to put together this full set, all the cards, it would cost you well into the millions. But probably around or more than 80% of that price would be spent on just these 4 cards. Let me talk about just one of the common bunch first, because it's a story I want to share. You can get your hands on a low-quality T206 Doc Powers card, call yourself the owner of it, for less than $100. It's not a bad deal. With such a huge collection, a lot of them are marked by an attainable price. It's the sheer amount of them, and then of course the big four, that make a complete set almost impossible. Doc Powers, however, has the tragic fact of being the first ever player from the T206 set to pass away. Like I said, they started making these cards in 1909, and they would keep going until 1911. So that's the time frame for when these were actually being printed out and put on shelves. Obviously, a lot of copies had the chance to be printed in a 2-year period. But Doc didn't even make it that long. In the 1909 season, months after he gave the American Tobacco Company his permission to be on the card, Doc was chasing a foul ball and slammed hard into a wall. It was early in the season, and Doc's very first game active this year. In the collision, he sustained internal injuries and underwent extensive surgery, going under 3 times for intestinal work in a 2-week period before dying from infections caused by the surgeries. Thus, it's been a question as to consider Doc Powers the first player to ever die from injuries in an MLB game. Major League Baseball usually answers this question with a no. Most sources on the subject state that only one MLB player has ever died in-game, that being Ray Chapman a few years later in 1920. They skip over Doc Powers. I had never heard his name before looking into this, and I think he deserves to be brought up when the rare on-field death in major sports are talked about. With his T206's abundance, it's extremely likely that his card continued being printed well after his death. Despite the story, it hasn't become a particularly sought-after one. But, like any great society, above the 99% are the elite, the big four. Joe Doyle has classic collector value. It's an error card. They listed the wrong team for him. And the cards with the mistakes are very rare because someone caught it and corrected it early on, so they're very valuable. There's only a few, like maybe 6 in the world floating around, hard to find for sure. It's actually the rarest card in the set, though only the second most expensive. It'll cost you hundreds of thousands. One has sold for over $1 million, and that was the highest one ever graded, being a 3 out of 10. It's the same thing with Sherry Maggie. People love the errors. They just spelt his name wrong on a few prints, then fixed it real quick. Maybe the same time they fixed Joe Doyle. Also, I guess I should mention here, you can see the white border on the sides, and you'll a lot of the time see the T206 set referred to as the white border set. It's just a nickname for it. You can get a low-quality Sherry McGee spelling for somewhere in the tens of thousands of dollars. Or you could put your feet under you and walk the Eddie plank. Eddie's card is one of the most valuable baseball cards of all time, and awesomely, we don't know why. We don't understand Eddie. We never could. It's just super, super rare. It always has been. Some people theorize that there might have been a broken printing press, or that the spot where Eddie's card was on the template was like smushed or messed up somehow. So most of his cards were gross and didn't pass quality control. They just got thrown out. Seems legit. Here's $50,000. That's about the ballpark you're looking at for Eddie. And then there was one. This is the Honus Wagner T206 card, the most coveted, most valuable baseball card of all time. That's actually not entirely true as of when I release this video, but it will be again eventually. We'll get there. Someone has paid $7.25 million for this piece of cardboard. So here's a question. What makes a card valuable? The easy answer is scarcity, when there's less of them available. That is true, but not to an absolute factor. There are around 50 to 100 known copies of this Honus Wagner card in the world. The exact number isn't known, it is rare, but we have more than a few of them. We have more of these than we do of the Joe Doyle era cards. Hell, in the collecting world, there exist cards that are one of one. There's a lot of these types of cards made. You may remember the Paul Skeens one of one card taking up a lot of headlines a few months ago. This card, any one of one, is technically more rare than the Honus Wagner T206. Again, what makes the card valuable is the question, and the answer comes down to a few main factors. Putting scarcity high on the list isn't crazy, but close behind it? Well, who's on the card? I mean, a one-of-one Shohei Ohtani is usually gonna be more valuable than a one-of-one Jed Lowry. Sorry, I try to slip a lot of Jed Lowry references into videos when I can, so let's apply that. Honus Wagner, well, a Hall of Fame player, one of the greatest position players of all time, maybe would be the starting shortstop on the MLB all-time team. Most who played with or against him said he could have been the best at whatever position he wanted, he just happened to choose shortstop. He's also an all-time hitter with 8 batting titles. Oh yes, and...
It's the real Flying Dutchman!
Yeah, he had a pretty good nickname. When ESPN ranked the 100 greatest baseball players of all time, the Flying Dutchman was assigned number 12. Okay, so the player on the card was pretty good at baseball. But again, the player's skill, even when combining it with scarcity, is not the whole story. I mean, Babe Ruth is the greatest baseball player ever, even if you don't think that, he's up there, probably above Honus Wagner. That same ESPN list had Babe at number 1. Babe Ruth also has a card with just 10 known graded copies of it existing in the world. So, Babe is a better player and has a more rare card. Still, Honus Wagner, the Flying Dutchman, sees his T206 card sell for more money than that Babe one. How? The last two factors are how. And the one that really makes collectors go crazy is the significance. What is special about the card? Why should I care about owning it? For so many cards, including this Honus Wagner one, the answer is the story behind it. See, there was a lot of T206 cards made. Most guys from the set you can go find right now on eBay very easily. This was a huge and widely distributed set. It's estimated that over 1 million T206 cards were printed in total, but there were never, at any point, 1 million Honus Wagners. Very quickly into production, like right after they started printing the full set, the Flying Dutchman had his card pulled. Word reaches the printing facility that the American Tobacco Company was unable to get Honus Wagner's permission to make a card of him. He pulled out at the last minute, said no, denied them from using his likeness, so they had to pull the card. We don't know how many Honus Wagners were printed before he got pulled out of the set. You can estimate as much as you want based on how many exist today and infer what percentage of them didn't survive the 100-year-plus gap. Now, why did Honus Wagner decline to let them make a card of him? We actually don't know why. The common story in baseball lore is that Honus Wagner knew his fan base was a lot of kids, and he loved those kids. He wanted to do right by them, and he didn't want to encourage kids to get packs of cigarettes so they could try and pull his card. So, out of the goodness of his heart, he had it taken off shelves. This is the story usually given by, Honus Wagner's family. Understandably so, it's thoughtful and nice. It is almost certainly not true. Why? Well, here is Honus Wagner in a newspaper ad for Murid cigarettes, the very same year these cards released in 1909. Here is Honus being referred to by his more German nickname of Hans, his true name was Johannes, being written about specifically for his love of chewing tobacco during games. He famously always had a big lippin', but maybe he realized how much of a kid's hobby card collecting was, and he didn't want to encourage kids and cigarettes being grouped together. No, that's probably not it, because here is Honus Wagner on an 1899 baseball card advertising Henry Reckius cigars. Huh. Okay. You know what? No, more. Here's an awesome photo of Honus smoking a cigar years later. Oh, and here's an amazing baseball card around that same time when Honus Wagner was coaching the Pirates. This 1948 Leaf card captured him with a lip of tobacco packed so full it looks like he's storing infield dirt for later. And they called him John on this one. You could call him anything. Oh, Mr. Wagner. So then, why did he have his card pulled? Here is what we know happened. The American Tobacco Company had a guy. They had a lot of guys, but this one's name was John. John had a job, a mission. Make sure you get Honus Wagner's permission to be on our baseball card. If you do, the fine people at the American Tobacco Company will give you $10 as a thank you. John went to work. He sat and he gave his pitch to Honus Wagner. For a star of the game, he was likely being offered a few bucks for his likeness. We don't know how much, and we don't know the exact details of the meeting. Just John and Hans chatting it up. When they were done, Honus Wagner was very clear. It was a no. He was turning down the offer. He did not want his card in cigarette packs. Unbeknownst to him, this decision would accidentally make his card the most sought after by collectors, actually encouraging more cigarette purchases. Everyone learned it was rare pretty quickly. But John left that meeting with a check in his hand. It was made out to himself for $10 from Honus Wagner. The Flying Dutchman had felt so bad for costing John that $10 commission from the American Tobacco Company that he decided to pay the guy himself. It's an interesting move, and this is all we know for sure. These are the only actions that took place that were recorded. It doesn't give us a great answer on why Honus said no. I can't tell you why. Maybe it was to protect the children. Maybe he had a change of heart since doing that cigar card a decade back, and then I guess a reverse change of heart at some point in his older years. The best theory I've seen is that Honus Wagner was known to negotiate his own deals and play hardball while doing it. He had a reputation for a little stinginess. 2 years ago, in between the 1907 and 08 seasons, he actually went into retirement for a couple months, only coming back out when his salary was doubled. The guy knew how to get his worth. Maybe this was just another attempt to do that. He thought the American Tobacco Company would come crawling back with a bigger offer. Maybe they did. We don't know. Whatever happened, well, it made for a pretty interesting story, right? I mean, it's fun to talk about, try to figure it out. I had fun. And collectors eat that fun up. It's the backstories to a card, like this one. It's not just the face printed on the cardboard. The mystery or silly story or weird circumstance behind that face is what fetches value. That is the difference from a rare picture of a baseball player to an invaluable rectangle of gold. These are the three factors. They combine to determine how valuable your card is. The fourth factor, I kind of consider to be its own thing. These three figure themselves out. They're very important, but then all of them, all cards of any rarity or variety, are equally subject to the fourth and final factor. The condition of the card. What grade is it? There exist these third-party, independent companies, most famously PSA, or Professional Sports Authenticator. You can send in cards to them, and they will first verify that it's real, not a fake or a reprint as they're called. Fraud and lying, deception, very common things in the card collecting game. Then, PSA will give it a grade, a number, 1 through 10, that symbolizes how good of condition the card is in. To get a perfect 10, also known as a gem mint condition card, is extremely difficult. Everything needs to be right, good corners, no smudges, you're not slipping a little rip past anyone. And a 10 makes any card exponentially more valuable. You have to protect it as soon as you open it and unveil it to the elements, oxygen and such. some things are even out of your control. There's luck involved. You could do everything right, get the card sent to PSA without a mark on it, but, well, turns out the card was off-centered. One of the most important grading details is how accurately the decades-old printing press that made your card in a warehouse was able to stamp it in the middle of the card and then cut that stamp out. If the machine was half a centimeter to the left, it can cost you tens of thousands of dollars. Older cards obviously really struggle to get those higher grades and become very special when they're in great condition. An interesting tidbit with card grading is those one-of-one cards that I brought up earlier before. When there's only one made in the world and you happen to be the one to get your hands on it, most agree you don't get it graded. Because why would you? A one-of-one allows you and you alone to decide your card's value. The condition doesn't matter because there's nothing to compare it to. It's the only one, and getting it graded can really only hurt your value by giving you a low number. And that's card grading. So, there it is. You know, between those four things, what gives a card value? With that in mind, why is the T206 Honus Wagner consistently seen as the most valuable in the history of the hobby? Well, because you have a rare card, less than 100 known to exist today, that features an all-time great baseball player. Not only is it rare, but that rarity comes with a one-of-a-kind story of confusion and controversy. It's a physical representation of a small piece of lore from baseball's history. And here's the big thing. Of the about 60 total Honus Wagner cards to have ever been graded in the world, only 3 of them have a grade higher than 5 out of 10. It is the perfect combination of factors. Now, of those 3, the 3 best condition T206 Honus Wagner cards there are, well, there's 2 PSA 5 Honus Wagner cards. 5 out of 10, exactly half, and they're bronze and silver for the best it has. One of them is specifically 5-MC for miscut, implying that somehow the machine made that card larger than it was supposed to be, out of your control. In the card collecting community, this one is known as the Jumbo Wagner. The other 5 is just a base 5 out of 10, EX, which stands for excellent. And then, sitting lonely at the top, is a PSA 8 out of 10, near mint condition T206 Honus Wagner. This is the king. The card itself is the holy grail, but this specific variation, it is hard to put into words the levels of genuine mythology behind it. 1,000 years from today, if no copies survive, people will read the way we spoke of this cardboard slab and consider it urban legend, a mythical folktale. In 2007, this card sold at auction for $2.8 million. It was, at the time, the most expensive sports card ever sold. A record that has since been broken, but that's because this one hasn't been sold since. That was almost 20 years ago. And the man who bought it, Kendrick, owner of the Arizona Diamondbacks, still owns it today. He's holding on to it. Going even further, the story behind this one specific piece of paper has had quite the lifespan, which, as we know, only adds to the allure. For one, it's known as the Gretzky T206 Wagner. Gretzky coming from, well, the great one, Wayne Gretzky, who at the peak of his hockey playing career decided to buy what was already the most famous card in the collecting world, even in 1991. The card had been discovered 6 years before that, when a random collector in New York named Ray started reaching out to card shops trying to sell an ungraded, seemingly great condition T206 Wagner. We don't know how Ray got this card. The specifics of it coming into his possession have always been infamously shady. He once said it was from a relative, but then refused to give any information on said relative or how he got it. The card doesn't have much backstory before it mysteriously came into Ray's possession in 1985. Eventually, he found a buyer, two guys who wanted to go in on it together. They paid $50,000 for Ray's Honus Wagner card, as well as a bunch of others from the T206 set that he had. Now, these new guys were hardcore collectors. Both would become common names to see in the community. Their names were Bill and Rob. Bill saw an opportunity here. He could tell this Honus Wagner card they just bought was in better shape than any he had ever seen, and he owned a few himself. Bill took one of these other, lesser quality Wagners that he had and gave it to his buddy Rob in exchange for full ownership of this newer, better quality one. For whatever reason, Rob agreed. Rob had essentially paid $25,000, half of that original deal, for a different, lesser quality Wagner card. Alright. Again, this all happens in 1985. Bill held on to his new card for as long as he could. Then he got antsy. Only 2 years later, in 1987, he sold the card to another hardcore big collector named Jim, another big name in the industry, for $110,000. Not a bad return on investment in just 2 years. This deal was huge for the collecting world, and it's often credited with kickstarting a card collecting revolution that would occur around this time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The card's new owner, Jim, well, he went through a pretty similar phase. He had probably the best baseball card on the planet. He admired it fondly for 4 years. Then it was sold again, but this time it wasn't a private sale arranged independently between two guys that knew each other. No, this time the card went to open auction. Here's how you find out how much something is really worth. It had a pre-auction estimate of $114,000, which would barely be breaking even for Jim, probably a loss of money when you include time and inflation. Within 90 seconds of the auction starting, bids were over $220,000. Something was brewing. It was a three-way bidding war. Two guys at the auction house in person, and then an unknown third party putting in bids over the phone. When they got over $300,000, one of the two in the room dropped out. All we had now was just a man with more money than he knew what to do with, putting in bids against a ghost on the phone line. Seldom does one fight without knowing their opponent. When they got to the $400,000 line, neither flinched. The man in the room put up $395. The caller upped it whole. The man countered with $405,000, and the caller was just as quick to go to $410,000. Finally, the man in the auction house tapped out of the fight, ceding it to the mystery voice floating through the room. With the normal buyer's premium stacked on top, the person on the phone ended up paying $451,000 for a picture of Honus Wagner. The man on the phone, of course, was Wayne Gretzky. It was 1991. Technically, Wayne Gretzky bought the card along with Bruce McNall, his boss, the owner of the NHL's Los Angeles Kings, Gretzky's current team. Owner and star went in together on an investment. That's exactly what Gretzky called his decision to spend that much money on a card, an investment. I mean, the thing has just about 10 times its value that it had 6 years ago. Fair game. McNall said, quote, "If you buy something that is absolutely the best in the world, you'd be okay, because there is always another buyer for something at the top end." End quote. This coming from the guy who essentially bought Wayne Gretzky, the absolute best at something in the world, a few years ago, by trading $15 million to the Oilers for him, among other players. He has experience in the area. Upon paying such a ludicrous price for little old Honus Wagner, many in and out of the card collecting world were predictably in a stir. Allegations that the card was a fake or had been previously altered popped up. There were items of memorabilia that were sold in this same auction that were later proven to be fake. But many were also probably just a little jealous, trying to make Gretzky regret spending an amount of money they'll never make in their lives on an inanimate object. It's tough logic to swallow. But the greatest hockey player ever said, bet. And he sent the thing in to PSA to have it graded once and for all. This was very early into PSA's existence as a company, like the first year they existed. In fact, they were brand new, and with all the publicity this Wayne Gretzky-owned card had, PSA decided to make a statement by making it the first card they ever graded in their company's history. This is when the card earned its PSA near mint condition grade. That was the first number ever handed out by PSA. It was seen as a, quote, fantastic card in every way, close to perfect. Some still questioned it, but the president of PSA, not even the grader, also came in himself to take a look at it, and he thought it to be superb. That's the leader of the company. When this news got out, everything went to hell. You remember Ray, the original owner of the card? The first guy who we know for sure had it in his possession? Yeah, so when he read the news that his old baby had been graded a PSA 8 after selling for 8 times what he sold it for, he was, understandably so, upset. But he was also confused and angry, because there was a lot of pictures of Gretzky's card being plastered all over the place next to the record sale headline. And, well, it was not the same card that had started in Ray's possession. Uh-oh, spadoodleo. Ray went searching. Old boxes, the garage, under the sink, other house places. Finally, he found it. Exactly what he was looking for. A picture that he had taken of the card when it was still his. Ray claims that the picture proves that the card was altered at some point after he sold it to Bill. Ray thinks that it was Bill who intentionally altered the card in order to make it appear in better condition. This is generally done by things like trimming the edges or sharpening the corners of the card. Now, Ray put this picture everywhere. In the newspapers, he sent it out in the community, he tried giving copies of it to Bruce McNall, the Kings owner and current co-owner of the card, but he was dismissed instantly. He tried sending photos to PSA, saying they made a mistake, but they ignored him completely. Many people in the community, most people, just laughed at Ray's claims, and despite his efforts, they were shoved aside. Ray wasn't a huge collector, so he wasn't trusted, and he kind of just got shunned from the hobby. The general consensus was that Ray was a joke. A guy who sold the most valuable baseball card in the world for 50 grand, only to regret that choice when it sold for 400 grand a few years later. Now he was just trying to do whatever he could to get a bigger piece of the pie that's recipe he had already given away. Sorry, Ray, we just don't believe you. The card, the most valuable card, belonged to the Great One, and partly to the guy that owned his hockey team. Then, Bruce McNall was arrested on multiple counts of conspiracy and fraud. Wait, what? This is a longer story for a different day, but yeah, an NHL owner was thrown in jail, and his illegal financial activities also threw the Kings into bankruptcy. He lost the team, obviously. Regardless, him and Gretzky always maintained a great relationship, even still today. McNall's been released from jail, and they're friends. And there was never too much controversy over the card. It seems like it kinda just fell fully into Gretzky's possession. Alright, and we probably won't talk about Bruce again, maybe never, unless I make a video about him that is already titled The Wolf of McNall Street. So before we lose him to the void of eternity, it's my duty to let you know that he was credited as a producer for Weekend at Bernie's. Do whatever whatever you want with that information. So, yeah, I guess the card belongs solely to Wayne Gretzky now. Cool. From this point on, it was kind of forever, eternally known as the Gretzky Wagner, even today, years after he's sold it. He admired it for a few years, but like every owner of it, he was cursed and eventually heard the siren songs of shillings, wanting to sell the card to see what profit he could make. In '95, he flipped it to a little retail store called Walmart for $500,000. It's the worst return we've seen this card give yet. Luckily, it did not plunge Wayne Gretzky into money trouble. Then, Walmart decided to have a huge sweepstakes and give the card away at random to a lucky customer. Because this is America and success is an illusion, they picked a random poor lady in Florida to bury with the taxes that came with winning a giveaway of this magnitude. So she had to instantly sell it because she couldn't afford her winnings. Weird world we live in. Thus, the thing went right back to auction just months after Walmart bought it and still ended up pulling $641,000, a better return than Gretzky got after sitting on it for 4 years. This set the new record for a card's price, a mark that was pretty much only ever held and constantly being moved up by this very card. The guy that bought it this time, funny enough, was one of the in-person bidders from the 1991 auction who had missed out on the card when Wayne Gretzky beat him over the phone. It was 1996, we didn't know it yet, but the fun part of the story was over. The thing would keep being sold every bunch of years. The rest of the transactions aren't interesting enough to dive into, but here they are. This slab of ink has seen some things. It's been to some places. It was a journey to get where it is today. Its final transaction was in 2007 when Arizona Diamondbacks owner Kendrick bought it for $2.8 million, obliterating the record at that time. Fighting against history, Kendrick was not arrested on multiple counts of fraud, proving a sports team owner can hold the card safely. But he's held it ever since. Kendrick still to this day expresses no interest in selling the holy grail of card collecting. If the Gretzky Wagner T206 went on auction today, I'm not sure what it would get. I think it would get more than its last sale. I think it would re-break the record for the new most expensive card ever, but I'm not 100% sure. In 2005, mind you, this was 2 years before the final transaction, we got some bad news. Someone interviewed the PSA employee who had given the card its official grade of a near mint 8 years ago. In the interview, that man admitted to knowing that the card had been altered when he gave the grade. Now quoting, "We were aware of that when the card came to PSA. This particular card was obviously cut. The card is so outstanding, it would have been sacrilegious to call that card trimmed and completely devalue it." Oh. So that's nothing much there. Just, the man who had set the worth of a card millions of dollars higher than it deserved while being employed at the largest and most respected grading company on the planet, admitting that he did not make a mistake. It was an intentional act that would go on to cost multiple people hundreds of thousands of dollars, and his reasoning was, the card is pretty. This was PSA's first ever graded card. How? Why is this company still around? How did they survive this? Why do they still have credibility? You know what's really scary? We're not done. People still, for whatever reason, hardly listened or cared. That guy getting interviewed, it was just kind of an independent documentary. It wasn't like in a court or anything. Now, again, that was 2 years before the final $2.8 million sale. Clearly, that didn't shatter people's perception on what the card was and what it was worth. I mean, it didn't shatter Ken Kendrick's perception for sure. I think when you have a grade 8 out of 10 card and then word gets out that it was a complete and intentional lie from a company with no credibility, well, the obvious thing to do is to never ever get that card graded again. You walk nowhere near a PSA building and you hold that 8 out of 10 close to your chest. No one can tell you it is worth any less than what that slab says. Now, 5 years after Ken Kendricks bought the card, it was 2012, Bill, the man who bought the card from Ray way earlier in the story and then was accused of altering the card by Ray, well, he re-enters the story. Why? Well, because he's pleading not guilty on federal fraud charges. The fraud extended past cards. If you remember, Bill was a big name in the collecting world and became even bigger after getting this card than selling it. He was the king of memorabilia. At least that's how this arrest headline referred to him. But now, he was being accused of faking and doctoring artifacts from all over the place. From old Cincinnati Red Stockings trophies to phony locks of Elvis Presley's hair. Early on in the courtroom, attempting to secure a lighter sentence in a deal with prosecutors, Bill stood up and he changed his plea to guilty, admitting that he had altered the famous Gretzky Wagner card way back, right after Ray sold it to him. The judge allowed him to say this, then rejected his plea deal, saying it would be a slap in the face. The trial took a while, 3 years, but by 2015, it ended, and Bill was sentenced to 20 months in prison. Give me a moment, for a man named Ray is deserving of a victory lap. The original owner of the card, at first dismissed as shady and not really in the game, he was correct all along. He had tried to tell people that the card was obviously different than the one he sold Bill. No one would listen. Get this, after no one listened to him, he reached out to the top. Bruce McNall. He tried to warn the Kings owner. He also contacted PSA, telling them to take a second look. Both ignored him. Do you know what this means? Ray knew and tried to tell the collecting world that the card was altered. He was then shot down, ignored, and disregarded by a millionaire convicted of fraud and a company built on lies and deception with a grader who admitted to fraud that was run by a president that blatantly lied to the whole world. So that's the story of the T206 Honus Wagner, and specifically the Gretzky Wagner, the most famous one ever printed. Again, we don't know how many are out there. Around 60 are said to have been authenticated and graded. At least 54 have by PSA and another big grading company, SGC, over half of which were graded 1 out of 10. The Gretzky Wagner is officially a near mint condition 8 out of 10, and so long as Ken Kendricks or whoever becomes the next owner of it has common sense, it'll stay right there and never be regraded. I mean, it's been proven altered in a court of law now. But a Honus Wagner T206 has sold much more recently in 2022 for $7.25 million. It wasn't the Gretzky one, it wasn't even one of the 5 out of 10s. A nice 2 out of 10 Honus Wagner card sold for over $7 million. Now yeah, it may be true that a 1952 Mickey Mantle has grabbed the technical record for now at $12.6 million. But this was a 9.5 out of 10 Mickey Mantle card. There exist probably 3 Honus Wagners, at least, that could walk in and demolish that record at any time they wanted. But all their owners know how successful of an investment this card has been over the last 4 decades. They are holding on to them tight. This one night, I went to sleep. Now, it was my first time sleeping, so I wasn't very good at it yet. I tried and failed to get to the so-called kingdom of snooze, but too many things went wrong. That is, until I found a manta sleep mask lying on the ground. Whenever I find things on the ground, I touch them to my face instantly. And the manta sleep mask was magic. It took away that light shining through my window because the mask puts you in a full 100% blackout. It drowned out the noise of my roommate dancing to salsa music by himself in the dark because the mask has a built-in speaker system that can immerse you in white noise or nice sleepy time music. Soft, padded eye cups that caress your face like a toddler, an adjustable size for your weirdly small head. The Manta Sleep Mask has everything you could need. Get one today. Maybe even use the link in my description and code HYDN for a nice 10% discount. Support Manta Sleep and support the channel. A new chapter takes us into a new era. I attempt to display each chapter, each section, with a card or set that defines it. This one was not difficult to choose. After the last chapter, more years, if you can even fathom this, took place. Card collecting among youth was existent and prevalent. Cigarette cards dominated the market. In 1911, the American Tobacco Company stopped production of the famous T206 pack. They stopped because, well, the country had finally realized, hey, they have a very obvious monopoly on tobacco, so they were broken up into multiple smaller companies in 2011. Almost like how they were smaller companies before they all merged together. Odd. But this did not slow down cigarette cards. If anything, it helped the industry, because so many different brands were now putting out their own unique sets, rather than just the American Tobacco Company slapping 16 different labels on backs of the same set. In a country under Prohibition through the 1920s, tobacco was turned to that much more. Sets like, though not as gargantuan as the T206, dominated the market. Through the same time period, though, the hobby started being targeted towards kids to an even heavier degree. Candies, caramels, taffy, all confectionaries began carrying cards in them for extremely cheap prices. Grab one and get a card with it, it's a penny. This had happened before. We touched on a few brands that did something like it, but it was the mid to late 20s where candy cards really started ingraining themselves. That led us out of Prohibition and into the Great Depression. A lot of things happened back then. In the year 1933, with many in the country struggling, a new delivery system of baseball card was tested out. It would pass the test. Chewing gum, especially at the beginning of the Great Depression, had proven to be an excellent cheap commodity, able to make you forget that you haven't eaten real food in days because you have no money. Just toss a stick in and chew your problems away. Trick yourself into thinking you're eating something flavorful. Bubblegum had just been, invented, created in 1928. It was an obvious and natural pairing with cards alongside those candy-type treats. Gaudy was a chewing gum company, started by a guy named Gaudy, first name Enos, if that makes any sense. The bubblegum invention must have really sent him out of his lane, because he sold the company to a relative in 1932. The new ownership came in hot. Gaudy had successful gum labels, including Indian Gum, Sports Kings Gum, and Big League Chewing Gum, which is not the same as modern-day Big League Chew. Now, the gum was only sold one piece at a time, not a 12 or 24 pack, and after the trend started in 1933, you could purchase a stick of gum and a baseball card for 1 cent. 1 penny got you the two of them. The 1933 Gaudy set is iconic in baseball for a few reasons. It wasn't the very first time that anyone put ball cards in gum. I found at least one other company doing that in 1888, way before. It was the G&B company, but gum cards weren't popular, they weren't made often, they didn't have their own part of the market until right now. After the 1933 Gaudy set dropped, everyone was about to realize that gum was maybe the best way to incentivize kids to buy stuff right now. Putting a card in there gave them a second reason to spend a single penny. Now, this set numbered cards 1 through 240, though number 106 was mysteriously skipped over. Babe Ruth was included, and as was normal, he had more than one card, 4 total with his set, and you can see that trend be seen in a couple other Hall of Famers here. You can see with these cards what really made the set special and set it apart from any other one on the market at the time. It's just the look, the feel, the modernness to it, and most of all the bright colors. People admired how it was able to pop on the background, which is harder for us to really appreciate with these downloaded JPEGs that have been digitalized over and over. Mo Berg had a card in the set. He was halfway responsible for sinking the Titanic and also was a baseball player, but then he would become a World War II spy under the codename Remus. I don't know why we know that. He got kinda close to assassinating Werner Heisenberg on behalf of the CIA, he had the green light and was told to use his own discretion if he should or not, but he didn't. There is a book and a movie adaptation about his life with an insanely accurate title, The Catcher Was a Spy. You cannot argue that. He is the only MLB player who is known to have been a foreign spy, which makes him likely either the worst or only spy in MLB history. He was also a genius. He spoke 7 languages. He was called the strangest man to ever play baseball, which that is not an easy contest to win, and he was a generationally terrible, horrible, no good, very bad hitter. He played 15 years and had negative 4.7 wins above replacement. One year he got 7 hits in 61 at-bats. The next year he got 1 in 13. A reporter once told an opposing player, "Hey, did you know that Mo Berg can speak 7 languages?" The player said, "Yeah, I know, and he can't hit in any of them." Baseball quote. That's all made his card kinda rare. Jimmy Dykes' last name wasn't offensive yet, but they got his age wrong on a lot of cards, 36 instead of 26. That's an important distinction if Jimmy was looking to date. We know people love error cards. They always have, they always will. It's inexplainable, but neither variation is incredibly rare, error or no error, meaning it probably took them a while to catch it because a lot of both versions got printed. We can, through Jimmy Dykes, see another big leap that the Gaudy set took in 1933. The back of the card wasn't just an advertisement or blank. No, it said Jimmy Dykes and his team and number, and there was an advertisement, but you could read these whole couple paragraphs written about Jimmy, a little player bio type of thing. What information they gave varied by each player. There wasn't a set formula. Each one was unique, its own writing tailored to that player. Okay, and let's revisit the number 106. We actually don't know for sure why there was no 106. It was either just a mistake on Gaudy's end, a big mess up, or more likely, it was intentional to make people buy more and more and more gum, trying to get number 106, complete the collection, without ever being able to find the card. If intentional, it worked, obviously. People start talking, realize it's rare, maybe non-existent, but hey, they're talking about Gaudy gum. The cards have already done their job at that point. Obviously, the set became historically super popular. Now, a small number of collectors, confused, upset, angry, young, and old, the very few who were actually into collecting at the time, they wrote in to the gum manufacturer, complaining, "Hey, Gaudy, does this card exist at all? Is there none out there or only one or something?" Gaudy received a few of these letters. The next year, in 1934, the company would acknowledge its likely on purpose mistake. Number 106 of the set wasn't rare or hard to find, no. It did not exist. It was never made. To rectify this, Gaudy sent out a freshly created number 106, which they whipped up and threw Nap Lajoie's name and face on there. But the thing is, they only sent the card to the few people who had written in complaining about the lack of card number 106. Nap Lajoie was not put in general circulation. You couldn't buy him with a piece of gum. This is interesting because it means a very small amount of people got this card. But simultaneously, this weirdly means that the only Nap Lajoie number 106 cards that were sent out were sent to people who really cared. To care enough to write out the letter and do the whole stamp thing, whatever, mailbox. I don't know, I was born in 2004. Only the hardcore collectors, old or young, were doing that. So of course, there aren't a lot of these. It's the rarest and the most valuable card in the set, one of the most valuable of all time. But I bet if you were able to track down the ratio of cards made to how many are known to exist today, it wouldn't be insanely low, because the few people who got one probably knew to take good care of it. It's a weird one, too, because Nap Lajoie was retired by the time they sent these out in 1934, and he had been retired for almost 20 years, way long ago. A weird style choice to throw him of all people on your extra bonus card. There were bigger name guys, even more recently retired guys, who they could have done, but I don't know. Gaudy liked Nap. Another weird, cool fact that I like, I mentioned there's 4 Babe Ruth cards total. All 4 of these have more value than most cards in the set. Of course, it's the Babe, he's the greatest. However, one of the 4 has considerably less value than the other 3. It is much more common. This is believed to be because on the original printing sheets in 1933, the empty number 106 spot actually wasn't empty. They just doubled up one of the Babe Ruth cards, causing it to be printed twice as much as every other one. And that's the 1933 Gaudy Big League Chewing Gum set. One of, I'd say, the top 3 in the history of baseball cards. That's alongside the T206 and one more that we will touch on soon. But gum had joined the party. It got its name on the same guest list as cigarettes and candy is the way you get your cards. Plenty of companies would follow. 5 years after this Gaudy set, a whole family would enter the competitors' ring. The Shorin brothers, 4 of them, were birthed into ownership of a major tobacco company known as American Leaf. It was the 1930s. Smoking cigarettes was only going to get more popular, as it had been doing, until its peak at a high mountaintop in the 60s. But for whatever reason, the second generation of the company's ownership, the 4 siblings who were running it now, wanted to go a different way than tobacco. With Great Depression popularity still carrying it, they would choose gum. They needed a new name and new product line. They weren't sure what to do. All they knew is they wanted to be at the top of their field. And it was then, in 1938, that the Topps company was born. They would go on to play a part in the card industry. Another example is Bowman. The company was started right in the gum boom in 1927. The next year, bubblegum was invented, and Bowman was one of the few to see its potential immediately. They instantly began manufacturing bubblegum, challenging even the company Fleer, who had the employee that invented bubblegum. They established themselves through the 1930s, out-chewing competition with the heaviest gum that still cost a penny in the whole market. By the late 1940s, Bowman was also including baseball cards alongside their pieces of gum. The 1933 Gaudy set is deservingly so one of the most iconic ever, and it's hard to comprehend how much it changed the game. Not only did those and multiple other companies power their gum sales through trading cards through the next decades, but many of them would eventually become enormous mainstay players in the trading card world. They would drop the gum and move fully towards baseball cards. Topps and Bowman and Fleer, they became the baseball card market. Today, they are not known for gum anymore. They took over the industry after being put in the position because they got inspired by that 1933 Gaudy Big League chewing gum set. The next decade plus, well, it was the gum era. And maybe a few candies and cigarettes still throwing cards in there. The hobby became a real thing. Chewing gum became an ingrained part of it, whether you threw it away or liked to pop it in while you enjoyed your new card and compared it with your friends. It gained a little more popularity. It still wasn't huge mainstream, but it was getting small to medium sized. One day, well into the gum era, the street was quiet. Actually, it was probably busy, because the street was in New York, and on the street was a museum. Some people call it the Met. Really, it's the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Now, on that busy street in New York, outside of a museum, a guy walked along the road. His name? Jefferson. Hey, Big J. He's empty-handed. He walks into the museum. He tells them, I would like to make a donation to the Met. That's what some people call your museum. The nice lady says, okay, what would you like to donate? Cards. Jefferson says cards. The lady's response, oh boy, cards, like trading cards. Well, which ones? Do you have them on you? Could I take a look? Oh, you don't get it. Jefferson would have had a tough time explaining his way out of this one. Truthfully, he didn't know how many cards he had. Like most collectors eventually do, he had just reached the point where he needed to get the cards out of his house and stop taking up space, and he thought they had some importance. He had some people from the museum come take a look at his collection at his house. They walked into a room of amazement, opportunity, and horror. What Jefferson had was no collection. This was by far the largest and most complete historic assortment of trading cards the world has ever known. Decades after they sat here in Jefferson's house in petrified awe, his cards would be the staple, the hallmark, not even. They are the very foundation of card collecting and cataloging. It cannot be understated. After he showed the museum people, which I don't think is offensive terminology, they all left the room. It was obvious that this was something the Met should take. They saw the historic value. But the museum people had absolutely no idea what to do with it. Jefferson was told that his cards would be taken only if he could organize them. All of them. Again, he didn't know how many he had. He would learn. It was 300,000 cards. More than that, actually. Over 30,000 of them, aka just about 10%, were baseball cards. Jefferson started organizing. Again, 1947 this was. 12 years later, after working on organizing the collection that whole time, he retired from his actual job. He then focused on the collection full time. He started to feel that his work wasn't as good as it could be because he had to drive to the museum from his house and it was a far distance. So he moved closer to the Met for this sole reason. The organizing stepped up. Long days, longer nights, all spent cataloging, organizing, finding things in common with 300,000 little pieces of cardboard. Jefferson is the reason that, well, everything. It all leads back to him. The numbers, all of them. T206, N167, 48, 15, 16, 23, 42, they are all him. Jefferson was the numbers. The famous T206 set with the ultra rare Honus Wagner, yeah, so T just stands for tobacco cards, and it's the 206th different set of tobacco cards that Jefferson counted, that he had and considered to be a tobacco card. It was all him, his sole discretion, and only stuff that he had collected. The N167, that's the 167th set of 19th century cards he had. His collection is nowhere near limited to baseball cards. Again, they make up just about 10% of the total. The numbers also don't go up in chronological order. Jefferson didn't care about that. He was just numbering sets as he found them. This was literally just one guy's cards that he had gathered over the years, and I can't stress enough how much it became the definitive guide for card collecting of the whole early era. We all trust Jefferson blindly. We still do today. If you want old school cards, you go by this guide. It just became the standard. It worked out, so the sets he happened to own became important and valuable, and the ones he didn't have mostly been lost to time. Jefferson wrote the history. Now, he didn't own every card produced in the era, not even close, but now he owned every important card in the era because his collection is what made them important. Jefferson, whose last name is Burdick, is often referred to as the greatest card collector ever and the godfather of the hobby itself. Eventually, while organizing his collection, he fell ill. He fought to try and finish the impossible task of organizing the whole collection. But in 1962, 15 years after first beginning his quest, and 3 years after making it his entire retirement life focus, he was sick enough that he had to be transferred to a hospital. He kept working from his hospital bed, having people drive small parts of the collection over to him at a time. What happened next? Well, Jefferson didn't succumb. He got healthy, good enough to be checked out. He kept working. He finished organizing 300,000 cards. They were handed over to the Met, officially becoming their property, and Jefferson walked out of the building. Months later, he was dead. His collection gave him a purpose and a reason to keep living just long enough. It probably added years to his life. The year is 1952. Jefferson was in the middle of organizing his collection in New York, but elsewhere in the world, other things were happening, so we're going to jump to a different place. There's this company, Topps. I mentioned them earlier. They were a gum manufacturer, that's all, and they started doing cards. It took a while for Topps to really go hardcore into baseball, though. In the late 40s, they started putting out a few collectible sets with famous people on them, but it wasn't until 1951 that they released their first set of cards with baseball players. It was a normal set. It blended in for the time. The very next year, Topps would revolutionize the industry for the first of many times. A Topps employee named Seiberger would design that year's set, and with a few hundred cards, change the look and feel of the hobby forever. This is when cards started and didn't really ever stop looking like what we know them to look like today. You get the player picture, his name, team, and a team logo all displayed. You get each player's unique autograph, a big change. The back was maybe even more drastic, bringing in bios for players alongside their stats laid out. The cards also included general information, a birthday, a height, maybe a weight. Pretty quickly, this was adopted as the industry standard. It became an almost universal design. Unsurprisingly so, the 1952 Topps set is regarded as one of the most famous of all time. That big three I mentioned earlier, it's rounded out by this one, the most recent addition. It's been 73 years since the most recent addition to the big three. That doesn't bode well for an industry, by the way. We'll get there. Included in this pack is the number 311 Mickey Mantle card, which is today the most expensive card to have ever sold, beating out the T206 Wagner when it went for $12.6 million in 2022. Interestingly, the 1952 Mantle is much more common than the Honus Wagners. Well over 1,000 Mickeys are out there, and there are even 3 that have been graded a 10 out of 10, gem mint perfect condition. And the $12 million one, that was only a 9.5 grade, suggesting the market can still go higher. In 1955, Bowman released another full set of cards, as them and so many other gum manufacturers did every year now. The hobby was growing alright. One of these cards featured the first baseman of the Baltimore Orioles, Eddie Waitkus. In it, even from a different company, you could see the influences from that 1952 Topps pack. You got Eddie, his name there clearly written, last name only. He's got his uniform on. We're missing a team name or logo. It's kinda tough to read or see the Orioles bits on him. And on the back, we really see the influence, based on the Topps 52 pack. There's his name, position, team name, whole bio, whole post-it note of stats. And they even asked Eddie a question as well. They asked him, "Hey, Eddie, what has been your biggest thrill playing the great sport of baseball?" Eddie responded, "In 1949, I was shot by a deranged girl." Eddie, help me out here, man. This is a story. It's made for the big screen. It would be natural in Hollywood. I could see Robert Redford up there. Eddie Waitkus was a big leaguer, and a pretty damn good one. As I mentioned, this card with one of the most jaw-dropping, out-of-context lines you could ever read on it, like, what? It was his 1955 Bowman card. The incident involving said deranged girl was in 1949. If we were to timeline, maybe graph the Eddie story out here, 55 was actually Eddie's final season in Major League Baseball, capping off an impressively long career that spanned 15 years, but did have a 5-year break in it for World War II. And he wasn't just in the army. This guy was on the front lines fighting in crucial battles of the war, earning multiple military awards. Now, that deranged girl shooting. Yes, let's look into that. I guess we can start by reading the rest of the card. Well, that actually talks more about his recovery from the shooting in Florida, where a real nice lady helped him and then became his wife. Trauma bond. In reality, what happened was that Eddie Waitkus was one of the first recognized victims of criminal stalking. It all started in the 1946 season. It was Eddie's first one back from the war, as the country and world returned to a status quo. Baseball, though never stopping, returned to having its full array of stars in ballparks. A 19-year-old girl named Ruth Ann Steinhagen saw the Chicago Cubs play sometime this season, and for the first time, her eyes met Eddie's. Well, not quite a meeting. More so, she looked at the back of his head for a couple hours. It was instant admiration and affection on one side. Eddie didn't know she existed. Not long after that, it would turn to obsession. The two didn't meet face to face. They spoke no words to each other, but over the course of that season, Ruth dedicated a shrine on one of the walls in her house to Eddie. It was entry-level psycho, beginner stuff, pictures of Eddie taped up, newspaper clippings from games that mentioned his name, maybe his birthplace in big bold letters. Every night, she would leave one chair empty at her family dinner table for Eddie. It went on this way for years. Eddie was from Boston, so Ruth forced herself to love baked beans. Eddie was Lithuanian, so Ruth studied the culture intensively. She was the perfect girlfriend that he had never met or asked for. And of course, she kept showing up to Cubs game after Cubs game, eyes fixed, focus locked in a trance, watching Eddie Waitkus. Eddie also happened to get pretty good at baseball this year, and over the next couple back from war. That was likely made easier for him to do because he wasn't aware that there was a lunatic slowly falling in love with him more and more, building resentment and plotting his murder. But there was. Ruth was out there. Ignorance was bliss for Eddie. He made his first All-Star team in his career in 1948. Alongside him that year on the NL All-Star team was rookie first baseman Jackie Robinson, who would switch to second base the next year. After that 48 season, with Eddie's value at an all-time high, the Cubs dealt him. They traded him to the Philadelphia Phillies in a deal that involved grown men named Hank, Walter and Dutch, but Walter usually went by Monk. It was a better time for names. The Cubs could not have imagined the ripple effect that skipping this stone would have. You can say a lot of things about Ruth, the stalker, but don't let anyone ever say she wasn't persistent. When the man of her dreams, and I mean that only literally, got shipped away from Chicago, where she lived, her obsession did not slip. She kept watching from afar. By now, she'd been enamored, consumed with Eddie for like 3 years, and her family had well and long noticed. They probably noticed at the first family dinner when Eddie didn't touch his chicken piccata. With support from her loved ones, Ruth went to a psychiatrist sometime in the year 1948. Nothing changed. She didn't start hating Eddie, not even a little bit, not even at all. She loved him. Ruth's man had abandoned her, and it only made every emotion in her, good or bad, more extreme. In the 1949 season, the Phillies were fighting right above 500. They had a few series against the Cubs, both in Philadelphia. But on June 14th, for the first time that year, the Phillies came to Chicago. It was the first of a 3-game series there. Ruth got her tickets. Eddie Waitkus stomped on his old grounds. The Phillies beat a weak Cubs team easily. Russ Meyer had a pretty day on the mound, tossing a 2-run complete game while fending off 10 hits. Eddie, too, had a nice outing, scored a couple runs and nabbed a base hit. Later that night, the Cubs were checked into a beach hotel, all together as a team. Each player had a roommate they were bunking with. Eddie's was Russ Meyer, who was ready to take a load off after a nice pitching victory. The two teammates went out to dinner along with Russ's family. It was a fun time. Food, drinks, good people. Eddie and Russ returned back to their room late that night. When they got there, there was a note written on hotel stationery taped to the door. It read, "Mr. Waitkus, it's extremely important that I see you as soon as possible. We're not acquainted, but I have something of importance to speak to you about. I think it would be to your advantage to let me explain it to you." It was signed from a Ruth Ann Burns in room 1297A of the hotel. Now, the stalker's name was Ruth Ann Steinhagen, but this is a really weird detail. Eddie Waitkus' actual real-life girlfriend, who he knew existed, was named Ruth Ann Burns. I can't confirm when they started dating, but this must have destroyed Ruth the stalker. For your obsession to start dating someone with the same name as you, horrible coincidence. She was off the reservation at this point. That might have been what sent her over the edge. Now, upon reading the note, Eddie knew it wasn't his girlfriend. They'd been in contact, she wasn't in Chicago, and her name was spelled wrong on the note, so his mind just kind of naturally assumed it was one of Ruth's friends trying to get his attention. He obliged and walked on over. What happened in that high-rise hotel room that Ruth the stalker had bought for the night is only known for sure by the two people who were there for it. One, a loony, love-struck lady, the other an oblivious, objectified obsession. Both have long taken the truth, the little details, to their graves. Eddie walked into the room. Within seconds, Ruth reached for a rifle, a .22 caliber bolt-action Remington. She may have uttered a phrase. I've seen, "I have a surprise for you. If I can't have you, no one can." Some suggest it was, "You've bothered me for 2 years. You're done bothering me." Whatever it was, she shot the ballplayer. He had no idea who she was. The man whose head was currently on more than 25 pictures hanging up in her bedroom was the one she put a hole in. Many accounts say that right after Eddie was hit and stumbled then fell onto the ground, he managed to squeeze out the words, "Oh baby, what did you do that for?" He was conscious, gasping for air and speaking. It was just the two of them up in that hotel room now, the convergence of a years-long infatuation. It's darkly poetic. She held the man who she fixated over's life in her hands. She decided what happened next, if he lived or died. She chose to save him. Her plan was to shoot herself right after, but she later admitted she tried momentarily and couldn't find any bullets, so lost the adrenaline and was unable to go through with it. Eddie was hit center mass and bleeding profusely. Ruth likely aimed for his heart but missed, instead striking a lung and accidentally giving Eddie a shot to live. Within minutes, Ruth called the hotel's front desk and calmly told them, "I just shot a man." Quickly, staff, police, and medical attention would be high up in a Chicago beachside hotel. The call almost certainly saved Eddie's life. Accounts once again conflict. Some allege that after the call, Ruth sat in the hallway on a bench by herself while Eddie bled out, clinging to life alone in the room. Others say she knelt beside him, and when the police did burst through the door, they saw her cradling Eddie's head in her arms. He was rushed into surgery, and miraculously, despite 4 individual close calls, he survived. Police brought Ruth into Eddie's hospital room so he could identify her, and when he asked why she did it, Ruth stayed silent in front of her fixation. He would miss the rest of this MLB season with his injuries, but would still be named an All-Star that year for his impressive production while he was there. Eddie Waitkus actually got one of the coolest newspapers ever written about him, with a full page-length headline about his shooting being followed up by him being first in All-Star voting among all National League first basemen. And he'd get right back in action the next year in 1950, returning to love and support from fans nationwide as the Phillies won the pennant and lost the World Series behind the famous Whiz Kids team. Little Miss Ruth, well, she pled insanity, so a psychiatrist talks to her. It was a quick conversation. She was found mentally ill. Thus, Ruth got not jail time. No, much worse for this era, the insane asylum. But she was there for just 3 years, at which point she was, and I love this terminology, declared as cured and released. A judge had previously given Eddie the ability to press actual charges if she ever stopped being crazy, but upon her release, he denied to, saying he wanted to forget the incident. Ruth was free 3 years after trying to kill an MLB player. Eddie had a good career, played 5 more years, retired after that 1955 season where this beautiful Bowman card was made, and he sadly died of cancer at only 53 years old. Just 2 years after the incident took place, while Eddie was still playing in the big leagues, a novel was released that is more than loosely based on Eddie and this whole situation. It's called The Natural, which was Eddie's nickname in baseball, and it's a little confusing because it kind of weaves multiple popular baseball player stories into one guy, the same guy, but a key plot point is him being shot by a woman in a hotel room. Decades later, well after Eddie's death, the book was made for the big screen, keeping the same title of The Natural and starring Robert Redford as a decent-sized piece of Eddie Waitkus. As ESPN put it, in the funny, arguably sexist way, after the headlines faded, Ruth Ann did something else just as surprising. She disappeared into obscurity. She faded away from the public for the rest of her life, which went on a long time. She only died in 2012 at the age of 83. And of course, she, one day, would be subject to one of the craziest, most out-of-context answers to any question in human history. By the way, I guess I should mention, Topps, the baseball card company, yeah, they run the world now. It's only been 4 years since they started making cards, and 3 since they revolutionized what modern cards look like. The biggest producer of baseball cards when Topps entered the industry in 1951? Well, it was Bowman, another gum company. These two battled it out for a few years, each making the 2 best sets in the market year after year. They began competing with each other brutally to sign MLB players. See, there was no union, no Major League Baseball Players Association, so you had to sign deals with players individually. Remember, we went through this with Honus Wagner. Some ball players would sign a normal contract with both companies, Topps and Bowman, maybe even a few other small ones. But Topps started signing as many guys as they could to exclusive contracts with just them that said no other brand could use their rights on a baseball card. Quickly, Bowman had to start doing the same thing to compete, and thus it became a race between the two every year, not just to sign the most players, but to get the big stars of the MLB to exclusive rights deals. It was an NIL battle decades before college athletes would wage their own version of the same thing against the NCAA. Topps and Bowman competed decently, though it became one-sided quickly, and it's funny because the sets from both companies in these few years through the 50s have a ton of missing cards. Like, every card in a set is numbered 1 through 300 or whatever, but there's just a ton of numbers that don't have cards because the company lost their rights to the player at the last minute, and so they had to pull it from production. Despite how the numbers look, Topps was consistently winning the war in dominating fashion. Bowman had competitive total numbers and actually had a larger set. They got more players under contract in 1955, the year they released the infamous Eddie Waitkus card as part of their set. Eddie was a player that Bowman had gotten on an exclusive contract. He did not have a Topps card in 1955. But what these numbers don't show is that Topps had gotten all of the stars and blocked Bowman from having a set that most kids wanted. You want to get your favorite players, the best players? Well, Topps had all of them, so you had to buy Topps, not Bowman. In 1956, they won for good. Topps bought out Bowman. They had to pay $200,000 to gobble up their largest and only true competitor in the market. One day, only a few decades in the future, individual card sales would begin flying past that amount of money. But for now, from this point on and for the foreseeable future, Topps then enjoyed a monopoly in the baseball card industry. According to unofficial records, databases, and statistics that do not exist, Oscar Gamble has the largest and greatest afro in Major League Baseball history. A style icon, 1970s baseball does not look or feel the same if Oscar Gamble is not there. 70s sports in general, he looks like he belongs in the ABA with PhD doctors Dunk and J respectively. He also will often chart near the top of lists of the greatest mustaches in the game's history, though I'm not an animal. I'm aware Raleigh Fingers is number 1. But there is something else about this card, something that isn't right, and you can catch it right now, just based on what you're looking at. The mistake is staring at you in the face. I'll give you a hint, then I'll give you some time. It's that hair, and it's that team. Now, Oscar Gamble used to play for the Cleveland Indians, among a few others, and the afro became famous quickly into his career. There were practical problems attached to his head via his hair. Have you ever tried wearing a baseball cap over an afro? It's hard. He was famous for having bedhead, because when you're forced to lock that down in the confines of a cap, it does not respond well when the cap comes off. His hat and batting helmet flew off a lot, like any time he ever exerted effort to move. He once asked the Cleveland Indians fan base for tips on how to wear his hat better. Despite work from the best Cleveland scientists, no evolution was made on hatting an afro. Then, the New York Yankees took a gamble on Gamble. This card of Oscar, number 74 in the 1976 Topps set, was made very shortly after the Yankees traded for it. Oh yeah, Topps. They were a monopoly, remember? The jump between these last two chapters was big, like 20 years, but that's because it was mostly just all Topps monopoly, starting with when they bought Bowman in 1956, and still going strong here in 76. They had another major competitor pop up, Fleer, but they ended up beating them too, not by buying the company, but by getting them to stop competing. Fleer still existed and tried as much as they could to beat David while fighting Goliath, but they were reduced to such desperate tactics like in 1959 when they were able to acquire Ted Williams' rights, an aging superstar. But since Topps dominated the other 99% of all baseball players, Fleer just decided to lean all the way into what they did have. And they made an 80 card set with only Ted Williams cards, no one else. And like a lot of it isn't even baseball related, it's just a biography of Ted in card format, like hunting and fishing, serving our country. Wait, is that Jim Thorpe? Hell yeah. Also, a big part of the drama between Fleer and Topps was the newly formed MLB Players Association, which had started negotiating as a group now. But Topps was able to get the leg up by just saying, okay guys, we'll double every player's individual contract. The players said, ooh, yeah, more money, and agreed instantly, and Topps had beat another competitor, and they got to keep their monopoly. For now. Okay, back to Oscar's card. To show that he was traded so recently, they threw that headline clipping over the deal, something that was not normal for this set. It's possible they included that to try and distract you from, the mistake. Have you noticed the mistake yet? It's easy to slip by. You might kick yourself when I tell you. The New York Yankees, famously, have an extremely strict no-tolerance rule against players having long hair or beards. I think Oscar qualifies as long hair. How was the man who Kenny Rogers would one day sing about able to get away with an afro, a circus on his head, while playing for the most authoritarian team in the league? The short answer, he wasn't. See, 1976, when this card hit packs, was actually the very first year that this Yankees grooming policy went into effect. This happened to be right at the time when the owner of the club, George Steinbrenner, decided to make his team appear more put together and professional. When Topps heard about the trade, they were scrambling. They were about to release their full set for the season. Every card had already been made and was ready to be printed. Now they needed a new picture of Oscar, but the guy probably wasn't even in New York yet. The trade just happened. He didn't have a jersey, so he wasn't going to be walking around waiting for a photographer in one. So Topps got tricky with it. They took their old photo of Oscar in a Cleveland Indians hat and jersey, a little airbrush on the cap, some 1970s level Photoshop pinstripes, and voila, the only card you'll ever see of a Yankee with an afro. Because it wasn't really a Yankee. It's a fascinating set of circumstances, and with the attention to detail Topps usually has, it's likely this only got through because it was the first year of that grooming policy. I don't think they would knowingly make this mistake, but they either didn't realize what they were doing, or they just didn't have time to care. One of the weirdest rules in baseball, combined with a perfectly timed trade, gave us a uniquely one-of-a-kind baseball card, featuring a one-of-a-kind guy. Oscar, however, did end up having to cut the glorious afro, not long after being traded, cutting the heart of the 70s with it, to lengths that the Yankee overlord approved of. Another funny detail, Oscar had a $5,000 sponsorship with a hair company called Afro Sheen. Yeah, that checks out, and he didn't want to lose it. He was in contact with the company about the situation while he was trying to convince the Yankees to let him keep the afro. The company, Afro Sheen, for their part, did not care at all. They said, as soon as that afro gets cut, so does your sponsorship contract. But Oscar had no choice. It was that or his Yankees contract. His hair was clipped. Allegedly, his mother grabbed the hair off the ground in the barbershop and made a pillow out of it. Then George Steinbrenner, the Yankees owner, who, if I didn't have much time, I would probably describe as an awesome asshole, like a really cool piece of shit. Well, he had a rare moment of humanity, and he gave Oscar Gamble a $5,000 check for what he missed out on from his Afro sponsorship. I could explain Oscar's career, how he fared with the Yankees, how he left the team after a single season only to be pulled back by that New York gravity a few years later. I suppose I just did explain it a little bit. But no, all you need to know about Oscar Gamble is this. In that famously ruckus Yankee clubhouse under the brightest of all lights in the country, with all those pennants hanging above your head, pressuring you to make them more friends, it's different than any other team. It's often referred to as a circus. It's non-stop, utter chaos. When Oscar Gamble was asked about this environment, what it's like to be in and a part of and playing there, his response characterized what it was to be a New York Yankee. for the rest of eternity and all time before that too. Now quoting, "They don't think it be like it is, but it do." I have nothing to add. Do you see it? Do you see it? How about now? Wait a minute. Now, this is just a baseball card. It's from the 1989 Fleer set. I know, Fleer? What? I thought Topps had a monopoly. I'll get there. But let me talk about Fuckface first. This is a 660 card mega dump, and card number 616 of the bunch is not missing. Oh no, it's not. It features the brother of one of baseball's all-time greats, Cal Ripken's own flesh and blood, growing up in a big baseball shadow. And his name was Billy. 99 times out of 100, that, the Hall of Fame sibling connection, would be the only less than notable thing this card is known for. It is not known for that. It should have just been common level, never would raise an eye to any collector, but somehow the words fuckface were written on the bottom of whatever bat Billy Ripken was using for this photo, and no one, through the entire creation, editing, and production process, caught it? I don't know about that. The card hit the shelves. Quickly, kids realized. I can't pretend to have been there, I wasn't alive yet, but word spread. Generally speaking, it seems to have been that scary kid whose house your parents didn't let you go to, who somehow found out and spread the good word. The messenger. The preacher. Everyone wanted this card. A lot of them got it. Baseball cards were popular enough at the time that it was already printed and boxed and shipped across the nation everywhere when they caught it. Pulling it off the shelves would have cost the company serious money. They couldn't stop the first batch. A lot of Billy Ripkens hit the market. Today, it's estimated there are like high tens of thousands of these available. At first, wanting to avoid responsibility, Billy Ripken said it must have been a prank by one of his teammates. Years later, he would admit that he had marked the bat himself in an attempt to make it something that would pop out among all the other bats in the clubhouse. Then, one day at spring training, he's running around. A photographer asks him to pose, and he just picked up the closest bat to him and poses with it. The company still had to scramble to fix it. What happened next was a hilarious HBO Max level of corporate decisions. You can watch the Fleer Company panic in real time through all the different variations of how they tried to blur out the words. There's this awesome old website fully dedicated to the card and how many different versions of it exist, which claims 11 total and 25 different subversions. It's insane, and they have photos for each one. As we know, error cards are notoriously popular in the hobby of collecting, and this is the most popular error card of all time. Now, here's my holdup, and I'm not nearly the only one who thinks this. There's no goddamn way that was an error. Cards were big. Fleer was big. They had people vetting these, checking them, making sure they were perfect and precise. All the information was accurate. There's no way this was an accident. Billy Ripken also believes this to be true. He thinks that the profanity is actually enhanced in the image to be even more visible. I think this was an intentional error that did exactly what it was intended. It got people talking about the pack, buying Fleer cards, hoping for a Bill Ripken with a bad word on it. So, I guess I should mention, how was Fleer able to be selling cards? What happened to the Topps monopoly? Well, it fell apart. Fleer, who after all this time was still fighting in the industry, fighting against Topps, well, they finally got it taken to a court. And in 1980, 9 years before Fuckface, a judge ruled that, yeah, Topps did have a monopoly. They had restrained trade through their exclusivity contracts with players. So that was no more. It was ruled Topps could not have a player's exclusive rights to produce baseball cards. The market was opened back up. Other companies like Fleer, Donruss, Star, and a little later Upper Deck would flood into the industry. They could all get players' rights, all produce cards, and all make their own big packs. Topps was still the most famous baseball card brand in the game by far, and they would stay that way up to modern times too. They're the biggest of all time. It's tough to compete with them. But now, everyone else was at least allowed to try. Diversity and a lot of different cards from different companies define the next era. This is what led to things like the Billy Ripken fuckface card happening. This is what led to this new era, the most important one of all. I've been going by chapters, each card is set, but there's a much more generally accepted way of looking at the eras of card collecting. You start in the late 1800s, the tobacco era, highlighted by scarcity, most of them non-baseball related cards, people who were actually famous, and not many of them survive into modern time. Then there's the gum era, kickstarted by Gaudy in 1933, we start getting real child-friendly. The 50s or 60s, up until about the early 80s, is a bit of a gray zone. I've seen it called the vintage era, because that's how old a card has to be considered vintage. I've also seen the all-star era tossed around, but regardless, you had the hobby slowly growing. What comes next, what comes now, it actually started a few years before the Billy Ripken card, is known as the junk wax era. Now, junk wax, that comes from one thing. This was the peak of popularity in card collecting. All those companies that were now legally allowed to flood into the market produced their own huge sets, year after year. Overproduced sets, some might say. There were so many cards, with everyone printed so many times over that the market suffered from overpopulation. Cards couldn't become rare. And so, almost every single card from this era has little to no value. As we know, it's tremendously hard to gain value without scarcity. Starting in the 70s, you had these conventions start popping up. It was an old enough hobby that collecting was already generational. Nostalgic dads bringing their kids in, each looking for their own sets for different reasons. In 1979, the first Beckett price guide dropped, which would go on to become an industry standard for pricing and buying cards. In 1985, the saga of the T206 Honus Wagner started as the thing began selling for insane amounts of money, tens of thousands of dollars for one of them. Kids just trying to make a quick buck flooded into the hobby. That is, all kids, if you weren't aware. Cards were being bought and sold by themselves now, just full sets, no candy or cigarette flavored attachment. After being originally shoved in packaging to try and help sales of other items, baseball cards had not only become the important part of that packaging, but were now taken out and put in their own packs, good enough to sell by themselves. They became their own industry. Card collecting was cool as it's ever been. And one more awesome part of this era, my favorite part, is the things companies did to make people buy their cards. After the unprecedented success of things like the fuckface era in 1989, many brands began going above and beyond. It was happening before then, too. We've always known what sells, but that one was big, and it, mixed with the rising popularity of card collecting, all the history we know to be true with era cards, I think that all combined in a powder keg that erupted, and it erupted into this. It wasn't errors anymore. It was intentional. It was be weird, be different, stand out. Do whatever you have to do with a small image of this size to make people buy it. Baseball cards became clickbait. This encapsulates the era very nicely. Card collecting was fun. Everyone at school would see this new set drop this weekend and get working, talking around, buying cards, and figure out which was the weirdest or funniest or biggest error of the set. It encouraged communication among kids. It made them work to get money to spend on cards. It was the ideal hobby. For adults, well, they were kinda still seen as weirdos mostly, but block out the noise. Is that a 1981 Topps Charlie Lee? Look at the lip of tobacco on that boy. Honus Wagner would be either proud or ashamed. I'm still not sure which. Card collecting was awesome. I'll say it again. The hobby peaked. But here is what you have to realize. Get into the mindset of a collector from this era, any age. You already have an idea on what the most valuable of all cards are, and thus what makes a card valuable. Remember, it was 1985 when the Honus Wagner T206 card was sold from the honest man named Ray to the fraudster named Bill for 50 grand. It kept upping its price quickly through the next decade plus. The world was collectively learning. People now knew what to look for, what to hold on to, and to keep all your cards in as good condition as you possibly could. Everyone was growing their own awesome big collections. Conventions became meetups, packed with people, comparing, trading, selling. They were enjoying life with other real people around them. And so, there you are, in the mind of a collector in the junk wax era. You have your big whole assortment of cards. You add to it whenever you can. You've stacked up all the errors and silly ones and cool stories and as many great players from the time as you could find. Whatever the T206 Honus Wagner of this era is gonna be, you're gonna have it somewhere in your collection. And in 50 years, you'll be laughing at everyone who called card collecting nerdy, because this collection will be worth millions. There seems to be a bit of a misconception out there. The common story is that eBay came out, and others like it, the online marketplace, and this simple sole creation killed the card collecting market. That is not true. The invention of eBay did not kill cards. It simply revealed reality. It only took a few clicks now to see in real time how absolutely worthless the collection you've been building for the last 15 years really was. Because a few years ago, when you saw how much that T206 Wagner sold for, tens of thousands, and you said, wow, these are a great investment, I'm gonna start collecting all of them. Yeah. Well, the rest of the country had that same thought. There were now hundreds, thousands of copies of every card in your collection, and you could go bid on them on eBay for $1 a piece. The hobby had gotten too popular for its own good. When demand arose, the companies making cards simply kept making more. This is why it's known as the junk wax era, because cards were produced tens of thousands of times over, becoming not even common, more than that. They were abundant. They printed too many cards, the companies did. What you thought was an investment that would one day buy you a house and make you look genius was in reality some junk wax on pieces of cardboard. A couple hundred pieces of paper that you'll never quite let yourself throw away or get rid of, but will serve no use. That is, of course, except nostalgia, the memories, the feeling you get picking up those cards, which, in a way, you could argue makes it worth it. Displayed for this section, I have the 2002 Topps set, a 718 card issue that I put here for no real reason. It's meaningless. It's bleak. It's life now. Inside, you'll find Albert Pujols, Ichiro Suzuki, even a few Barry Bonds home run cards. This is the year after he broke the single-season record. One of the Albert Pujols cards even has an error, where they put the complete wrong picture of a different player on the back of his card next to his bio. Variations of this card exist that were graded as high as 9 out of 10 that I can find. I'm sure there's a 10 out there. Travel back with me for a second to what makes a card valuable. With this 2002 Topps Albert Pujols error card, you have an all-time great player with a known beloved factor, the error, plus a funny story behind it. They put a picture of his teammate, one of his close friends, instead of him. You have the card existing in good condition, but what are we missing? What are we always missing through this era? Scarcity. The cards are mass-produced. People aren't just getting them with gum at the gas station for fun anymore. They care. As soon as they open them, they put them away safely into sealed compartments. They all stay in good condition, so many of them. The Albert Pujols error card in decent condition will sell for well under $20. That PSA 9 one, it went on eBay for $30 sold. Even with an error, enough got out and word spread, people knew it was important, so there weren't enough copies for it to be valuable. You can buy the entire 2002 Topps set for about $60. The Bonds, Ichiro, Pujols. The Hall of Famers, they might get you $5 if you're lucky each. The rest are worth like a cent a pop. It becomes more just about getting someone who's willing to take them on at that point. Penny cards. History's come back in the worst way. Maybe they'll start putting candy with them to make them sell better. Cigarettes, anyone? Sports cards still exist today. Topps was eventually toppled as king. There's a new monopoly in town that goes by the name of Fanatics. They are beginning to display some tendencies that, to historians like you and me, might seem familiar. They bought out their main competitor in the industry. In the deviously poetic way the world works, Topps was acquired by Fanatics in 2022 for $500 million. Just as they had beaten so many competitors, they too had their time come. Okay, Fanatics, well, be careful there. Seems to be getting close to monopoly territory. Fanatics has also acquired exclusive licenses with both the MLB and NFL for producing cards. Wait a minute. More recently, Fanatics has been taken to court for antitrust exemptions by Panini, another smaller sports card company that alleges Fanatics has monopolized the industry. Okay, no, I've definitely seen this movie before. Fanatics was able to get the exclusive deals, which Topps was specifically denied because it made them a monopoly, by negotiating directly through the leagues and their association rather than the individual player contracts like Topps has historically done. It's hilarious. No one seems to care enough to stop that little loophole, to stop history from repeating itself. We're watching it happen again, but the important part of that sentence was that no one cares enough to stop it. It's not a huge deal. Fanatics is gonna be the only ones allowed to make baseball cards. Okay. Sadly, the world has realized enough to lose faith in baseball cards. The industry survives now mostly on nostalgia. A museum is a more appropriate setting than a store because more people are looking than buying. It's not dead, just injured badly. It's not as big as it once was. It's not as big as people once thought it might eventually be. But they're still here, in small storefronts, a little part of the shopping center, old brick buildings, and newer neon-lighted ones. They're still here. A small but mighty community keeps the hobby alive. It's just not the same as it once was. The story ends on a somber note. Most do, if you give them enough time. You know what they say. A guy walks in to the Museum of Sports Cards. He probably doesn't stay long.